Okay. Okay. I think this is where we left off. Yes. Yeah, I hope this kind what we were talking about in terms of byte addressable memory. I hope it is clear now, and I hope you guys understand why we are doing this. Like why this, especially the most important thing that you have to. I mean, the important takeaway is that this A of 8 is now converted to 32. This is 32 because there are 4 bytes here, and it is 4 into 8. That is 32. So I do a load word and I go to the fourth, I go to the 32nd byte, right? Because it is byte addressable, and each chunk of array is taking, each element of array is taking 4 bytes. So if I have to access the second A of, say, I mean the third element of A or A of 2, then I have to go to the eighth byte. Right? So that's why I'm doing this. So I hope this is clear. If you still have doubts, feel free to um, talk to me. So there is one more interesting thing and an important thing that how memory is arranged. There are two different schools of thought. We'll see other schools of thought also, or the way they are organized as an architecture. One is big Indian architecture, the other is little Indian architecture. So what do I mean by that? Let's say I have uh, let's say I have an address, I want to store the data values, say 0x 01, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right. So how many bytes are there in this? How many bytes are there in this, including the zero, if I want to represent that zero also? Yeah, any answer is fine.
80.
Huh? Sorry? Yeah, I didn't hear.
Any bytes?
Yeah, how many bytes do you need to represent this X value?
40.
Bytes?
So is that hexadecimal?
Yeah, 0x means hexadecimal, right? So, oh, okay, is this been taught to you? Like, what is hexadecimal? So, can you convert from decimal to binary, binary to yeah,
Yeah.
and I hope you'll be able to convert to hex also, right? So, if I write 0x, it means hex.
So 8 into 324.
Um, no, how many bytes will you be able to? I mean, how many bytes do you need to store this value?
4 bytes like an integer.
Sorry?
4 bytes
4 bytes.
Yeah, how did you get 4 bytes?
like we treated it as an integer or something like that.
Yeah, just I mean hex is pretty simple, right? So this
I
can be
converted.
represented using 4 bits.
Yeah, I converted to binary and then
Yeah, it's just
converted
4 bits here. This is 4 bits here, and this is 4 bits here, and so on and so forth, right? So I can represent two numbers using a byte or 8 bits, right? And why is it 4 bits? Because I can go up from 0 to up till 15, which means that I go from A, B, C, D, E, F, right? F is the last. So I have 4 bits. So these two, yeah, please wake up. I know it's Monday morning. I also just woke up. So try to wake up, have coffee, ask your mother or father or anybody, somebody to give you coffee. Yeah, yeah. So it's 1 byte. So I can represent this using 4 bytes, right? So um, now I have a memory which is something like this. Let's say my memory is something like this. Yeah. Of course, I'm just writing it in vertical, but it can be horizontal also. I mean, it's just representation. Right? So this is address A, and this is address A plus 1. This is address A plus 2, and so on and so forth. Hmm. Right. Now, one thing that I can do is I can store this particular byte. So this is 1 byte, right? And I can store a byte in this particular address. So I can store this 0, 1 here, 2, 3 here, 4, 5 here, and 6, 7 here. Okay. So what did I do? I took each byte here, 0, 1, and stored it here. And then I took 2, 3 and stored it here, 4, 5 and stored it here, and 6, 7 stored it here. Right. So this is the LSB. I don't know if you know this or not. This is the least significant bit or least significant byte, whatever you want to call. And this is most significant byte. Here the MSB is being stored in the smaller address when compared to LSB. So LSB is being stored in a bigger address when compared to the MSB. So you start with storing the MSB. So if you have an memory something like this, let's say this is what you have been used to. Let's say I have memory A. So let's say this memory is 0x1, 0x2, 0x3, 0x4, and so on and so forth. I store the MSB here. In this case, I will be storing 0, 1 here, 0, 2, 3 here, 4, 5 here, 6, 7 here. So I start with storing the MSB. It's the way I read, I just store it in the memory. So this is called Big Indian format. The way I store this is called Big Indian format. And I think anybody can guess what is a Little Indian format. The same memory, I mean, I have the same memory, but I don't store it this way. I store it this way. So I store 0, 1 here, 2, 3 here, 4, 5 here, and 6, 7 here, which means that I store the LSB here and the MSB here. So this is how I store the
So 0, 1 is the MSB.
Yeah, that's what I think. I was writing something on this. Yeah, so this is much more like, so I store the MSB in the bigger address and LSB in the smaller address. So this format is called Little Indian. So I have two choices. I can store either using the Big Indian format where the MSB goes to the least bit address and LSB goes to the bigger address, or I can say I will store the LSB here, which means that the LSB goes to the smaller address and MSB goes to the bigger address. But why are we talking about it? Because different architectures have used a different way of representing it. Specifically, Big Indian was used in Motorola and PDP and other places. Little Indian is being used in x86 architecture. So if you are using an Intel-based processor in your mobile or in your laptop or wherever, it is following the Little Indian architecture. Okay, maybe I think we should do this instead of. Okay, is this clear? I mean, at least. I mean, it's just the way of representing the data. You should just know that you can represent it in using, you can store it using either Big Indian. It's not just representation, it's the way of storing the data. Either you can store it using the Big Indian format or you can store it using the Little Indian format. In the Big Indian format, the MSB goes to the smaller address and LSB goes to the bigger address. It's like the way you are reading. So this is Big Indian, right? So this is the way I am reading. So I can just plug this and say, okay, this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But whereas if it was Little Indian, I would have to store something like this. So if this is my memory, I would have stored it has something like this: 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this is Little Indian. So the way I store a given particular data is, it can either be in Big Indian or Little Indian. Of course, this is, if you have doubts, please ask me. But more than this, I think I should be doing, if I do this, it will be easier, I guess.
Sir, is there some kind of disadvantage or advantage between the two?
Yeah, that we can't actually discuss now. So we'll see as we go ahead. Initially people started with Big Indian, but when we started with floating point representations, there is something else called PDP-11 Indian or Middle Indian, which seems to be effective, but there is no actual benefit like going from Middle Indian to Little Indian. It's the way that the architectures are chosen to represent the data. But let's say I want to. So can you write a okay? So the other way to ask this question is, can I write a C program to figure out can I write a C program to figure out whether my architecture is Little Indian or Big Indian? Can anybody tell me how do I write this?
Maybe using a char pointer and printing the A of.
Yes, right. Yeah, so it's just this. So I think I might have it, but if I don't have it. Okay. So we'll take the same example that we took here. And then I use a character pointer to get the data. And then I go from. So there are 4 bytes here, right? So I go from 4 bytes. Let's not have this. Okay, so what will it print now? Can anybody tell me what will this print?
Six, seven, four, five.
Yeah, so it will start printing from the, because this is an Intel based processor, so this will start printing from 6, 7, right? So you can see that it has printed 6, 7. So that is the least significant bit, but the least significant bit is stored in the lowest address because I'm going from 0 to 4. Then it's printing 67, 45, 31. So the way to read it is 0x1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Of course, if this was a big Indian architecture, it would have printed 1 followed by 2, 3, followed by 4, 5, followed by 6, 7. So it's just that the way you store it. Of course, as I said, anybody who's interested in this can go further and read about it. So there is something called Middle Indian architecture or PDP-11 Indian architecture. Can anybody guess what it might be? Because we have covered both the cases, right? Like storing from LSB to MSB and MSB to LSB. So what do you think Middle Indian might mean to you?
Maybe when we use float, then the integer part of that float variable is stored first and then the decimal part.
You are not exactly right, but yeah, the thinking is in the right direction. Yeah, I would leave you to go and read about it. But you have to understand that the way to store the data, there are many ways to store this data. One is Big Indian, the other is Little Indian. Of course, there is PDP-11 Indian or Middle Indian, and you can just go and read about it. But I hope you guys understood what we are trying to do, right? I mean, if you have any doubts, please ask me. Let's say, okay, let's come back to this instruction. We said that I can add, so what is this instruction doing? This instruction is taking the value, whatever is there in this register S3 and adding 4. This I represents here immediate. So the I represents immediate. So I am taking the value in this register S3 and adding 4 and keeping it back in S3. Now, let's say I want to move something from S3 to S4. Let's say I want to have an instruction which says move S3, S4. I don't have to have a move instruction. I can get this by using an add instruction. How do I do this?
In the place of 4, we can put 0.
Yeah, in the place of 4, you can put 0. You don't even have to put 0. We saw that MIPS, not just MIPS, most of the processors will give you this. So you can see that there is one register that is $0 or whatever that register is called. It is always storing 0. So I can just do an addition of the register that I want to move with 0 and store it back in the other register, and this will be done. So you don't even have to store constant value because this constant value might itself take space, right? So you are just using the register which is always storing 0 and using this. We also saw some kinds of branch instructions when we were talking about our own architecture. I'll just repeat it for your benefit. So it says branch equal to, which means that if R1 is equal to R2, then I jump to wherever I say this label is. So when I'm writing the code, I say a label 1, and I would have named that particular thing as label 1. Of course, this will be converted to the program counter, which we already saw. But when we are writing assembly, we can just use labels. So when if R1 is equal to R2, then the control will go to the label 1. So similarly, if if this R1 is not equal to R2, then I will go to wherever I have specified as label 2. We'll see this in a short moment. Of course, I can have, so these two are some, what do you call is conditional jumps. Just to give me a second, I think there's some problem. Yeah, so these are something called conditional jumps. And why do I call it as conditional jumps? Because I am testing for some condition, whether this R1 is equal to R2 or R1 is not equal to R2, or whether there is a 0 flag that is set, branch not 0 or something like that. We also have something like this where it is unconditional jump. I don't know what's the issue. And what do I mean by that? Whenever I get this instruction, when I say J of label 3, irrespective of what has happened in the system, it will just go to label 3. So it is just like a go-to statement, which means that if I use this statement, it will not check for any condition. It will just jump to label 3. It might seem redundant, but there it has its own uses. So let's say this is the proceed program. Let's say I want to execute this if-else statement. If I is equal to J, then I want to do F is equal to G plus H. Or else I want to do F is equal to G minus H. And I assume that F is in S0, G is in S1, H is in S2, I is in S3, and J is in S4. Will you be able to write an assembly program for this? So can you guys try? Take 2-3 minutes. Even if you don't get the mnemonics right, then which means that even if you are not using, say, add, or you are saying it, you are writing it as add, it's okay. But you just have to understand how you write this assembly, the C program to assembly code. Just keep in mind that there are like branch instructions available to you. I can do branch equal, branch not equal to, I can use jump and things like that. So what is my goal? First I have to check the condition. I have to check whether S0 is equal to, sorry, I have to check whether S3 is equal to S4. If S3 is equal to X4, then I have to do S1 plus S2 and store it in S0. If S3 is not equal, then I have to do S1 minus S2 and store it in S0. I mean, that's all I have to do. So I have to have a branch, a condition. I have to have an add. I have to have a subtract. And I should make sure that both an add and subtract don't get mixed up, or they don't get executed. Both of them don't get executed.
So could you please explain the branch instructions again? Like what exactly do they do?
Yeah. So let's say I have an assembly set of instructions. Let's say I have, I don't know what's the issue. 1 second. Sorry about it. I don't know what's the issue. Okay, this seems to be working. battery is full. And I don't have anything else. Okay. Yeah, we'll try to make with it. So let's say I have a set of series of instructions. Let's say I have add say R0 comma R1 R1 comma R2. I have another instruction subtract R2 comma R3 comma R4, and then one more instruction which says add R5 comma R3 comma R2, and I have some series of instructions. Let's say at some point I write branch equal to R1 comma R2 comma label 1. And let's say I name this, when I'm writing the assembly code, I write this as label 1. So I just add this label 1 here. What do you think will happen?
When sir subtract command will run automatically.
Sorry?
Like it will run in execution, like it will run in series now. So first of all, when this add thing will happen, then subtract thing will also happen.
Yes. So the first instruction that will be executed is this, right? So let's say this is the first instruction, then followed by the second instruction, followed by the third instruction, right? And this is the fourth instruction. What is the fourth instruction? The fourth instruction is checking whether, so fourth instruction is checking whether R1 is equal to R2. Let's say R1 is equal to R2 is true. Let's say R1, both R1 and R2 values were same. Okay. Let's assume that for some reason R1 is equal to R2. Then what is the next instruction that will get executed?
It will jump to label 1, the
yeah,
first instruction will run.
Yeah, it will just go here and start executing this again. Because I am saying branch if equal, if this R1 is equal to R2, then I have to jump to a label 1. So I start executing this instruction again and again.
Sir, sir, will this work if the label comes after branch equation?
Yes, it works. So wherever you write the label, it works. So it just, I mean, this label is just for your understanding. It's to make an assembly programmer's life easier. But this label will finally be converted to a PC value. So there will be no label as such when you are giving it to the system, because when you are converting it to the machine code, this label will be converted to a program counter value. We already saw a program counter, right? So we saw that each program, each instruction has and monotonically increasing program counter value, right? So this is the first instruction 0x1, then 0x2, 0x3, 0x4, and so on and so forth, right? So instead of writing 0x1 here, you are just writing label 1. I mean, that's the only thing that is different. I mean, it's just to make the life easier. I mean, life of the programmer easier, that's all.
And so BNE is just if it's not equal.
Yeah, BNE is just the other way around. If the branch is not equal, then only it will jump. So let's say I had this as branch not equal to. Right. Now the same condition holds true. Now will it jump? Let's say R1 is equal to R2. Will it jump now?
No, it won't.
No, right? Because it will come here. Because this label 1, it will not jump. So the next instruction will be executed. This will be, let's say, let's again some R2, R3, R4. Then this is the next instruction that will be getting executed. The reason is because this branch condition failed. That's why we call it as conditional jumps. It is based on some condition. I either jump or don't jump. So if this condition is true, if this condition is true, then I jump. If the condition is false, then I go to the next instruction. That's all this branch statements does. But let's say I instead of having this branch not equal to, let's say I had just jump label 1. Then irrespective of what has happened before, whenever this statement is executed, I'm not saying true because I'm not checking for any condition. Whenever the statement is executed, this will go on to this label 1. But this does look dumb, right? Because so it comes here, then it goes here, then it comes here, it goes here, right? So I'm just stuck in an infinite loop. So why would anybody want to come up with a jump statement?
Maybe we don't use it in the beginning. Like maybe we can label 3 something some other place and we can point it to there. Let's say
Yeah.
some pointer or something.
Yes, right. So I can use it in different ways. But I mean, even if you didn't understand how to use it, I hope you understood what is an unconditional jump and what is a conditional jump. Conditional means I am checking for a condition and jumping to a particular label. Unconditional means irrespective of, I mean, I don't even check for a condition. So as soon as I see this, wherever is label 3, I will go to that label 3 and start executing that instruction. Now, can you try writing this program? Just try it out, not in your head. I know that everybody is Shakuntala Devi here, but please take a pen and paper and try it out. You just try it out. Try writing this piece of code on a pen and piece of paper. Yeah, just try it out. If you are not able to write this, let me know. Maybe we'll discuss it further. Because this is what you will be doing in the lab. Like you will be writing programs in the lab and go ahead.
We'll just keep always add G and H. What we will do
So
is if the condition
are you telling me the answer?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, no. Everybody take 3-4 minutes. Let everybody write in their own sheets of paper, and then if they're stuck, we'll discuss it. So this is what you will be doing in the lab. I mean, you will be writing assembly code. Like finally, you will be also writing bubble sort, quick sort, and things like that. So you will have to get comfortable with writing assembly code. This is all there is to assembly code. Like you use labels and you use, but it needs much more. I mean, much more thinking when compared to C programming, because C programming you have been used to it. But generally, people are not used to assembly programming. So it takes some time to understand assembly programming, but once you understand, it's just logic that you will be using to write programs. Unfortunately, I will not be able to use HackerRank or anything because I don't think there's a platform. So we'll be using something called an emulator. And you will also be building an emulator. So as I said, previous batch actually built a very good emulator. One of the, I remember like 3-4 emulators that were very good. One of them was, I think, Nikhil's batch. So I'll try to ask him to give you guys a demo. So he built a really great interface where it was a web-based interface and it was much better than the one tool that we'll be using now. Yeah, let's see how it goes. Yeah, just try this. If you are stuck somewhere, it's okay. This is the first program. It's like writing Hello World. Like it's the first time that you are writing Hello World, right? So obviously there will be syntax errors. There will be, I mean, logical errors and things like that. But you'll get a hang of it. So I know I have an add instruction, I have a subtract instruction, and I know where the registers are. I know a branch not equal to, which means that I can compare two registers, which means that I can say branch not equal to, yes, branch not equal to S3, S4, I can have some label, which means that if they are not equal, I go jump somewhere. I also have something called jump, which does this label 2 or whatever. I don't know what's the problem today. Yeah. Okay. Assuming that the time was enough, was everybody able to like at least give it a try? I mean, if you are just answer the poll, if you are, I mean, if you are stuck somewhere, it is okay. But at least get a hang of what is happening, right? So that is more important. It might not be the right program. It might not be the best efficient program that you are writing. Okay, I think most of you got it right. So yeah, but anyway, we'll just go through this again. So this is one program that I propose. Of course, it can be any way. I mean, it can be any other program. So what am I doing? I am just checking whether S3 is not equal to S4. If S3 is not equal to S4, then I have to execute F is equal to G minus H. So if F3 is not equal to S4, then I have a label called else. So I go to this else and I subtract and go to the next instruction. this will jump only if these two are not equal. If they are equal, then it will go to the next instruction. Right? So this is the only thing that you have to remember. So I say if they are not equal, then I go to this else statement. If these two are not equal, then I take this else and go here and start executing this instruction, which means that I skip these two instructions if S3 is not equal to S4. But if S3 is equal to S4, then this jump will not happen. Then the next instruction that will get executed is this add. And that's what I want. So I add S1 and S2 and store it in S0. Then the next instruction, I have to have an unconditional jump, because if I don't have this, then I do an add and then I do a subtract, which doesn't make any sense to me, right? So if let's say I didn't have this, let's say I didn't have this, then what would have happened? The else statement would have worked out pretty well, but the add statement, what would have happened is S3 is equal to S4. So I come here, I add, and then I go to the next instruction, then I subtract, and then I go to the next instruction, which means that I both add, I did an addition and followed by a subtraction, which I don't want to happen. So I use a jump exit, which means that after I'm done with add, I don't want to execute the else part of it. I just exit. Is this clear?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, okay. And yeah, if you're still stuck, feel free to interrupt the class anytime.
Sir, is there something specific about the indentation in this assembly code?
No. I mean, this, I think when I lazily copied it, it happened. Generally, I mean, you can, the problem is this assembly code that you are saying, generating, right? You can generate it in any way and it will get converted to an ignition executable. But it also depends on the architecture that you are, the specification that they are using. So if there is some weird character and the compiler is not able to read it, then it will complain. In your lab, you will not be doing it using a machine, actual machine. We'll be using something called an emulator, which we'll be talking about in the next lab. That's why we didn't have a lab this time, because I wanted you to get introduced to this, all these concepts. So what you will be doing is you will actually be emulating a system. And that what is that system? That system architecture is MIPS. So you'll be emulating this MIPS architecture. So it will have an interface where it will be telling you all what is the register values, what is the memory values, and there's a specific way it can read it. So if you not the indentation, but let's say you have some funny characters that are lurking around here, then the emulator is not intelligent enough to tell you that there's a problem. It just doesn't execute. So there are such things, but we have some experience with it. So if you're stuck somewhere, we'll be able to help you out. Okay. So the way the data is handled in the system, or in general in any system, is I have some amount of memory reserved for both stack and dynamic data. I don't, of course, have a division here. The stack grows from top to bottom, and the dynamic data goes from the dynamic data, or whatever you want to call it, right? Like, let's say heap. It moves from bottom to top. So generally, there is no demarcation here. So the stack is what you want. Like whenever you are declaring something inside a function, it is actually on the stack. So we'll see more use cases of the stack as we go ahead. So this is not to be confused with the stack that you will be implementing in your data structure course. Of course, when I mean stack, it means that you are pushing, and when you pop, you will get the recently pushed element. But that stack is so it doesn't mean, this stack doesn't mean that when you write a C++ programming stack that will come and sit here. No, a stack means any data that you are inside, you have that inside a function. Dynamic data is generally heap, which means that whatever you do using malloc or new or whatever is generally allocated here. So this grows like this. This stack grows like this. We also have a register called SP. SP is called stack pointer. We'll see what's the use case of it as we go in further. So the stack pointer is initialized to this particular value, which means that it is somewhere here. Whenever I push something to a stack, it just increment and go to the next level. There is space for static data. What do I mean by static data? Please don't confuse it with that the data is static. It is not that. It is just that the memory allocated for that data is static. So you can write something to it. It doesn't mean that when you start the program, whatever you have written into the static data is always constant. It's not about that. It is just that let's say I declare a global variable, then it will be in the static data because the memory is predefined. You can't increase it anymore, but you can change that value. Okay. So, and there is something called global pointer here, and whatever text that you write, whatever the program that you give to the system or to that guy is stored in the text space. The result space is for handling interrupts, and maybe, of course, this MIPS doesn't have an operating system. It's generally to handle interrupts and other stuff. So there will be some piece of code that is lurking around here, which is predefined code, and it might be to handle some keyboard interrupt or to some display input interrupt or whatever it is, right? So this is how you organize the data, not just in MIPS, in most of the processes. So MIPS doesn't have multi-processing. So it's just one program that is always running, and this program is divided like this. But in your system, it does support multi-processes, which means that you can launch multiple processes. You can open Firefox, you can be watching a movie, you can have Zoom and keep listening to the lecture, which means that each one will have one of such copies. And they will be mapped to a memory, which we will be seeing very late in the class, how this mapping happens, maybe in March or sometime in March. But MIPS has only one program or one process that is running, and that is how the data is organized. Is this okay?
Sir, after SP,
Mm-hmm.
is it the initial address and final address? 7FF and...
No. This is one address.
Okay.
Yeah, just a space to show you. I mean, generally people use space here, but you don't have to use a space. So there is no space here. So it's one address.
Okay, sir, fine.
Right. Okay. How many bits are there here? Since you asked this question, how many bits are there here?
8 bits.
8 into 4.
Yeah, not 8 bits, right?
8 into 4 bits.
There are, I mean, I don't know why you guys are getting confused with the hex representation. Okay, if somebody doesn't understand hex representation, please try to read about it. This we assume that you have read it in your digital systems class. Right, this is taking 4 bits, this is taking 4 bits, this is taking 4 bits. What is FFF, right? So if I have to convert into FFF into the bits, then what is the value of this? If I have to convert it to binary, what is the value of this?
All one.
All ones.
All one. No, how many ones? 4 ones.
4 ones.
And if I have to convert it into decimal, then what is the value? It is 15. Is this okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, right. So there are 4 bits in each of this. If I have to convert this, what is the value in binary?
0, 1, 1, 1.
0, 1, 1, 1, right? So there are 4 bits, so there are 32 bits. Now, why am I using 32 bits? Why am I not using 16 bits or 64 bits?
So MIPS has an architecture like that.
No, what is that MIPS architecture like? Is it because of the MIPS architecture, or is it
Address bus?
Yeah, address bus, but we already saw in this class.
We need at most 4, like at least 4 bits to represent.
The word is 32 bits.
No, we already saw something about memory of MIPS. What did we see?
Byte addressable?
No. We saw something here, right? I don't know whether I think we saw, but so yeah, I have also here, Margaret. So what did we say? MIPS has 2 power 30 memory words, right? Now we are saying MIPS has 2 power 30 memory words, but we are using 32 bits to represent the memory. Why?
Because we need a unique, at least 2 power 30 unique addresses. So we need at least 32 bits to represent all those addresses.
No, right? 2 power 30 I can represent using 30 bits. Why do I need 32 bits? Yeah, what is this? I think you guys have not understood what I've been repeating. See, I said MIPS has 2 power 30 memory words, which means that I can. So if I have 2 power 8 values, how many bits do I? Okay.
8 bits.
If I have 2 power 8 values, what does this mean? It is 2 power 2. What is this? This is 256, right? So how many bits do I need to represent 256 different values?
8 bits.
8 bits, right? So if I have 2 power 30, then how many bits do I need to represent?
30 bits.
30.
Then why am I using 32 bits?
It is hex, right? We have to.
Hey, what is this, man?
Sir,
Uh-huh.
nothing.
No, I'm not angry. I'm just like, I don't know whether I taught you this case or properly or not, right? I've been shouting again and again. What is
So it
memory?
should be a multiple of 2.
No, right? Why should it be a multiple of 2?
Sir,
It should
30
be a multiple of
is
8 because it's
32
byte
is better than 30.
32 is better than 30. Why?
Sir, I think memory. You said memory is byte addressable. We have 30 bytes.
We have, okay, you are almost there, but your answer is wrong.
Sir, for representing 30 also we need 32 bits. Sorry, sir.
No, right? This is not representing 30. This is representing 2 power 30. It is still a multiple of 2. Right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, right?
A multiple of 8.
So it has to be at least 30, but it has to be a multiple of 8 because it's only byte addressable. So 32 is the closest.
No, that's not the answer. Okay. What do we do? So should I repeat everything or? Okay, I think surprise tests are really important, I guess, because we can ask such questions in surprise test, and both of them, everybody will be surprised, I guess. Array, what is this 2 power 30? Is it 2? When I say 2 power 30, am I saying there are 2 power 30 bytes or 2 power 30 what? What have I written here?
2 power 30 memory words. So 2 power 30 locations.
Yeah, 2 power 30 memory words. How many bytes does a memory word have?
Four bytes.
Yeah, right. Why? Because what is that I have written? This what is
The
this word?
32-bit word.
32-bit word, right? So there is what do I have? One word is 32 bits. All right. One word. This we have already seen, right? One word is 32 bits, right? And if I say 2 power 30 words,
it is stored in 32 bits.
No. If it is 2 power 30 words, how many bytes do I have?
2 power 30 into 32 bits by 8.
Bytes.
2 power 32. 2 power 32.
2 power 32?
Yeah.
Bytes.
Bytes.
And you know that irrespective of the architecture, memory is always what?
Byte address.
Byte address.
So how many bits do you need?
32.
30, huh? How many bits do you need?
32,
32, right? So why is this confusion coming? I mean, I am now surprised. I mean, more than you, I am surprised. Yeah, I don't know what to do because okay, what was the, I mean, why didn't you guys not pick this up? Like we have been saying, right? One word is 32 bits, which means that there are 4 bytes in a word. If I say MIPS has 2 power 30 memory words, I cannot generate an address for a word. I will always be generating an address for a byte. Memory is always byte addressable. Please etch that in your memory. All right. So whenever you recall your memory, it should come to your mind that memory is always byte addressable. I know that I'm on recording, and if somebody listens to this video, they might point out saying that there are memories which are like bit addressable and things like that. But more often than not, memory is byte addressable unless specified. Right. So if memory is byte addressable, I have to ask how many bytes are there, irrespective of what I say. If I say I have given you, let's say I gave you, let's say instead of saying MIPS had 2 power 30 memory words, I could have also told you MIPS has 2 power 29 2 memory words, right? Or 2 power 29 double memory words, or whatever, right? I could have come up with some crazy thing and said MIPS has 2 power 29 double memory words. And what is double memory word? It is 64 bits, right? So finally, I have to convert everything to how many bytes are there in the system. So how many bytes are there? If it is 2 power 30 memory words, each word is taking 32 bits or 4 bytes. So it's 2 power 30 into 2 power 2. So it is 2 power 32 bytes in the system. So I need 32 bits to access the memory. That's why I have 32 bits. That's why they are using 8 digits here, 8 hexa digits here. All right. 8 hexa digits or 32 binary digits. Right. So either 8 hexa digits, because this will be giving me 32 bits, or 32 binary bits. Is this clear? Okay, let's launch a poll.
Yes, sir. I think I was making the mistake where I thought it's just enough to be able to identify each memory address, like each memory address.
Yeah, we should.
That's the mistake I was making.
We should never be able to access word. We can't access word. It is byte addressable. I mean, that just keep it in your memory. It is always byte addressable. So whenever I generate an address, this address will be translated to a byte, which means that I have so many such bytes. And how many bytes do I have? Instead of, if I say 2 power 30 memory words, then it means that I have 2 power 32 bytes, because in this architecture, a word means 32 bits or 4 bytes. Okay, since you have started this, I think I'm a bit worried. So let me ask you these questions. I think I had this before, later. Does everybody understand how do I convert 101 to decimal?
Yes, sir.
Right. I hope everybody understands how do I convert 1011 to decimal. If you are not understanding this, please read your digital electronics. If you're still not understanding, feel free to contact me. I will explain you. I love digital electronics. I think I might be handling your lab also in your summer. The other thing that came up is how do we do it? I would encourage you guys to buy a breadboard. Breadboard comes for 100 rupees or something, and start experimenting. It's a very interesting thing. So if you're stuck with, if you're not able to understand some concepts of digital electronics, feel free to ping me anytime. I will be more than happy to help you. That's one of the subjects that I really love. And I hope you understand what is LSB and what is MSB. LSB is least significant bit or byte or whatever it is. In general, it's least significant bit, and MSB is most significant bit. When I have 32 bits, the amount of data that I can represent is 0 to 2 power 32 minus 1. This minus 1 comes because I have already used up one of the things, because I am representing 0. Generally, people store everything in 2's complement. Right? I hope you know the difference between 1's complement. So I can store, if I have say 4 bits, if I have 4 bits, I can only store positive values. If I store only positive values, it will be from 0 to 2 power 4 minus 1. I can store, if I store only positive values, then I can store from 0 to 15. All right, in this case, 0 to 15. So I am storing 16 values. This is one way to represent, but I'm only storing positive values. But my challenge is to store negative values also, right? Because as a computer, I can't just say I will only represent positive values and I will never represent negative values. So I have to store negative values. So how do I know negative values? One of the easiest way to do it is take the first bit, the MSB. If it is 0, I say it is positive. If it is 0, let's say there are 4 bits. Let's say there are 4 bits, x, 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 x. If this is 0 or 1, I will say whether it is positive or negative. It's just a sign convention. You can use anything. And these 3 bits actually represent the value. Now I am limited. I cannot store any more 0 to 15. I have my number of numbers that I can store. What is the range if I have this from what to what I can store?
0 to 7.
Yeah. Think again, man. See, this is 0 to 15. Now I have introduced a minus. So what is the least that I can store? What is the least?
Minus 8 to 7.
Minus 7.
Minus 7. Minus 7 to plus 7.
Yes.
But I am not happy in this kind of representation. So I go to 1's complement. And I am also not happy with 1's complement representation. So I go to 2's complement representation. Now, what am I not happy in this representation? That's why I go to first 1's complement.
You're wasting one value. You're not able to represent. You're not able to represent another value which you could have.
What is that value? Why?
0.
Yeah.
You're wasting
0 is
You're
Zero
basically
plus
storing
3
minus
times.
0.
Yeah, so that's why I go to 1's complement. But I'm still not happy. I go to 2's complement. Why?
Because in 2's complement, 0 is specifically defined as the complement of 0 is specifically defined as 0. So you're able to store from -8 to +7.
No, is it the only reason that I use 2's complement? Or, okay, the other way to ask this question is, why does that happen in 2's complement? What is so special about 2's complement? Why does 0 get a unique place in 2's complement?
Maybe because you are adding one.
So then 3's complement, what will happen? Let's say there's something called 3's complement. I mean, I'm just making it up. Let's say I add 1 and followed by another 1. What will happen? Okay, if these things are not clear, you should not just understand that 2's complement, there's a special space for 0. You should understand why it is. So generally, to explain, people use something like a clock. So you keep adding. In these values, the clock, there is a jitter, but in 2's complement, it actually collapses. So you can see that the 1 gets discarded. That's why when you are doing an addition in 2's complement, what happens if I do an addition in 1's complement? If I get a carry out, if I have an overflow, what happens? Okay, is this taught to you or not?
Yes, sir. We did addition subtraction with 2's complement.
Yeah, so if I do 1's complement, if I take 2 values in 1's complement and add, if I get an overflow, if I get a carry out, what will happen? What should I do with the carry out? Let's say I did an addition, right? Let's say I did x, x, and say y. So these are 4 bits, and both are in 2's complement. And let's say after doing an addition, I got, say, one carry that is, say, z. What do I do with this carry?
Discard.
Yeah, 1's complement, man.
So add it to the LSB part.
Why? Okay, you guys are really